This week on The Record, stuck on hold. How many minutes people waited for 911 to pick up the phone during deadly storms. Could that delay have had deadly consequences?
But the way the system is designed, by hanging up, you go back to the end of the line.
And when will the city speed up its emergency response? Missouri House Democrat Dell Taylor is on the record with plans to upgrade the system. And about face at the Supreme Court. Why the conservative justices no longer treat precedent like the guiding hand it once was. Constitutional law professor Andrews Walker breaks down the court's recent rulings for The Record. Plus, the fight for Southern Illinois includes a slugfest in a primary race to the right. Darren Bailey launches his bid to challenge Congressman Mike Bost. And private text messages reveal how Mayor Tishaura Jones worked behind the scenes to block State Senator Steve Roberts' chances of ever becoming the next St. Louis Circuit Attorney. We show you her text with her advisors, aides, and her father as candidates courted her favor to try and replace Kim Gardner. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. We have a lot to get to this week. We're going to jump right into it with first-term House Democrat Dell Taylor. Good to have you with us, representing the Central West End part of St. Louis City in Jefferson City. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
You're just new on the job. 6 months, you said?
Yes.
And you went through the budget and the appropriations process.
Yes.
I'd love to learn more about your first impressions of Jeff City can I call you an outsider?
Yes.
But first, there's been a lot of attention paid to the chaos and the aftermath of these severe storms, which is a different kind of challenge than violence, for example, but something that 911 centers have to encounter often. What went wrong?
Mark, that was the 911 call center got well over 1,000 calls, like 1,070 calls within a 2-hour span. Call centers are designed for a certain capacity, and that was double their capacity. So number one, they just got so many calls. It's a challenge for them to respond to those calls. And as many of us know, our city is challenged with a lot of unfilled job positions. We have openings in the 911 call center, we have openings on the police force, we have openings for first responders.
And that has to be frustrating because there's little you can do as a state representative to resolve that. That's a city function.
Correct.
Of hiring.
Yes.
But there's funding that
Yes.
the state can provide.
Yes.
And that's why we wanted to hear from you, because you had some involvement in the funding. Take us behind the scenes. How was the sausage made there?
Mark, I am so glad that you asked, because I sponsored an appropriation through our legislature, and we secured $10 million to help the city of St. Louis build a public safety access point. So working through the House, working with the Senate, lobbying the governor and the Office of Administration, $10 million is going to build 2 new buildings in St. Louis City near Cass and Jefferson dedicated to public safety.
It's a $42 million project.
Correct.
One of those is a child care center. The other
Yes.
is the big consolidated place. But that's not going to open its doors until 2026.
Correct.
Did the $10 million that you secured speed up the arrival of that project?
Mark, before I put in the appropriation, the state was not participating. There was 0 state participation. The city of St. Louis was planning, and they had already set some funds aside, and that was one of their projects that they were actively working on. But the state's helping with $10 million is significant. That's almost 25% of it. So I think this will help with the timeline and getting this PSAP built much sooner.
The Public Safety Access Point for
Yes.
our viewers maybe unfamiliar with that acronym. You're being quite polite, and any of our viewers who haven't already read this news story might not just catch from your comments here that you've glossed over something important in the process. The bill that arrived on Governor Parsons' desk was for $20 million in funding.
Correct.
And that was a victory.
Yes.
He slashed it in half with his veto pen.
He did. There were far more appropriations this year than we've seen in many past years. Some would say that the budget that we passed in the legislature was bloated or a little large.
Was it balanced?
It was balanced only from the perspective that right now Missouri has a reserve fund.
Of $8 billion.
And we were digging into that reserve fund significantly this time. The governor said, let's not dig in so deeply, let's also recognize that the state's general revenues are not growing at the same pace. So the governor pulled back a little bit and tried to apply some fiscal soundness. Some projects got cut. My project is moving forward, just not the full 20 million. We're getting 10 million this year, and we may try again next year for additional funds.
Before next year's legislative session, you have another opportunity to override the governor's veto if you can muster the votes. Can you whip enough votes to override Governor Parsons' veto? And I'll add this note. Republicans have been banging the drum of public safety, especially in St. Louis. Are they on the hook now to put their money where their mouth is, or put their vote where their mouth is?
Mark, 10 million is a lot. That's a lot, and we're all very excited about that. I spoke personally with Speaker Dean Plocher, and he was behind this. The House of Representatives, we passed 13 million for this appropriation. So the 10 million that the governor approved is not very far from what we had passed.
Your
in the
initial
House.
aim was 13. The Senate juiced it up to 20.
Exactly. Do we have the votes for the veto override? I don't know. I really am too new, and I need to spend some more time with Chairman Smith, with Speaker Plocher, with some of my other counterparts to see, is this really worthy of a veto, or can we come back again next session and try and up it a little bit more in next year's appropriation budget?
Do you have to consider political feelings, or someone feeling like they were rankled? If you override the governor's veto, do you lose political favor with him, or is this something where you think, you know what, let's go for this, let's take the whole bag back home?
This appropriation got strong bipartisan support. I think everyone, and the governor approving 10 million says that he supports this. We all recognize the importance of this public safety access point. It's very important. Is it worthy of a veto? I don't know. Does the timeline of the implementation, this project isn't expected to actually be completed until 2026. So theoretically, we don't necessarily have to veto it. We could just come back and add a little bit more in next year's appropriation.
Are there any other avenues for funding that could go to more immediate help? For example, when 911 dispatchers pick up the phone, you're calling them, they're blind to where you are. They don't know if they're getting a spate of calls from the same hotspot, if they're getting them from all over corners of the city, and they spend valuable seconds on the phone trying to discern that information when technology could already get that information, provide it to the dispatcher, and get on with the rest of the call. That's technology the city doesn't have. Is that something the state could provide?
I think that's something that the bodies that be, Interim Director Chief Coyle is in charge of public safety, and he's in charge of the 911. Adam Cohen. There are individuals that are much closer to this to make recommendations on what type of software upgrades, or what other policy changes we should consider. One of the big pluses in this public safety access point is that Chief Coyle is going to be bringing all of the 911 call centers and the dispatchers under one roof. Having them in one place, cross-training them will help tremendously with training, with scheduling. So I'm not dodging your question. What I'm saying is that there are people that are much closer to this to make the software call and the policy calls.
Very interesting. Before we let you go, a lot of our audience also watching carefully in this summertime period at youth violence especially is grabbing people's attention. Is there anything in this budget, anything you can do from your perch that helps steer youth away from those sorts of traps?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked, because I'm also excited that I had two appropriations that were approved. $126 million to St. Paul Saturday and $100,000 to the Village. Both of these are nonprofits, that volunteer organizations that focus on youth mentoring, bringing the youth in on Saturdays, having them work together, learn conflict resolution, exposing them to gyms around our city. One group took the boys on a field trip to the Wentzville automotive plant to actually see how a factory works. So those funds will help organizations that are already doing a tremendous job. And Mark, I have to put in a plug for them. The boys, the young men that attend those youth mentoring programs graduate high school. 100% high school graduation rates. This is phenomenal.
Real results. We'd love to learn more about that when we have more time. Representative Dell Taylor, his maiden voyage on the record in his first year in Jefferson City. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
We're back in a moment with a lot more insight and analysis on the Supreme Court's busy week last week. That's next.
Hey St. Louis, 5 on Your Side is hitting the road and heading your way. All summer long, we're bringing the Weather First forecast live to fairs and festivals near you. Watch at 4, 5, and 6 for 5 at the Fair from 5 on Your Side. Focused on you.
What's the forecast in Florissant? no matter where you are.
What's the forecast in St. Peter's?
Or how you get your weather.
We know you want the forecast for your backyard. And you want it now.
Right here and right now.
The 5 on your side, Weather First team, focused on you.
Anders Walker teaches constitutional law at St. Louis University and joins us now. He's on the record. Good to have you with us. How closely are constitutional lawyers watching and parsing all of the decisions that came down from the Supreme Court in these last several days?
Well, we're all ripping up our lecture notes and rewriting what we're going to say next semester.
Is that a bit sarcastic or legitimately?
No, it's true. The court is trashing opinions that have been settled law for decades, and so we've got to totally revamp class next semester.
Affirmative action had been a precedent for 45 years, thereabouts. But there are conservatives who say it was never intended to be permanent. It was sort of a Band-Aid and temporary in the first place. How do you evaluate we know the impact in some states that have done this. There was a sharp decline from students of color in the immediate aftermath. But on the legal side, what do you see changing for liability around admissions offices and public or private universities in the courtroom?
Good question. The court made it clear that schools cannot use race to admit students with lower grades or test scores. However, they did say students could mention their race in personal essays, and that schools could consider that as long as they're looking at character, whether the students have overcome obstacles or challenges. So we don't know what the new standard is. We're just going to have to wait and see.
It'll have to be tested out through other litigation.
My guess is that's right. Someone will have to challenge some decision by an admissions committee admitting a student that they think was based on race.
Some of the reporters who were in the room made a lot about the perceived clash between Justice Jackson and Justice Clarence Thomas. Is that catching attention from legal minds, the tension in this debate, or is that expected?
Well, now that Justice Jackson is on the court, Thomas can no longer say that he's speaking for all African Americans. He's been very opposed to affirmative action in university admissions from the very beginning. He said personally he had a terrible experience in college and law school. People thought that he was just admitted because of his race. And so now he's on the winning side, but Justice Jackson did issue a blistering dissent saying that Thomas was basically ignoring reality.
Mm-hmm. There are two other big cases. I want to kind of go through those and we'll come back and just look at the big overview of this too. But in Colorado, there was this web designer who said, I don't want to create or express art on behalf of a gay couple if they're getting married. And the court sided with this person. But the dissenters in Justices Sotomayor and Kagan and Jackson said that this was a license to discriminate. Just how far-reaching is that decision in terms of, there was already the wedding cake case that everybody knew about. Now there's this other case that seems to reverse that. But is it limited, or could this also open the door to a whole bunch of other discrimination?
Well, this case gives us a little more clarity. The Masterpiece Cake Shop wedding cake case was a little unclear. Now the court has made it pretty simple. If someone wants an artist to make a creative work, then they can't force them to do it. They can ask, and if the artist says, no, I don't want to do that, they can't call the sheriff and have the sheriff put a gun to their head to make a cake or a website.
Well, right. And I guess one of the questions, too, is it only about, as you read the case, could this type of discrimination or refusal to associate with or perform services for a prospective client, could it extend to other protected classes beyond just the LGBT community? Could it be any other basis? Could someone just pick a reason to say, I don't want to do this for you?
Presumably, yes. So the big difference, I think, is if it's a product that's already been made, it's already on the shelf, there's nothing that's going to have to be done, then a store can't refuse service. And so a client can walk into Schnucks and buy a cake. Schnucks can't say no. But if the artist, the baker or web designer, has to make something, they can't be forced to do it. They can say, no, I'd rather not do that. That's my creative self-expression.
creative self-expression comes in many shapes and sizes. What if that professional is in a white-collar services, a doctor or a lawyer?
That's a great question. So I don't know if doctors or lawyers or artists. We'll just have to see.
That also could be litigated in the future. So there were some critics of the Supreme Court who raised sort of a rhetorical argument using logic to compare the affirmative action case to the LGBT case. And they basically said, wait a minute, a private entity in a company can deny someone service even though they're in a protected class, but a public university cannot accept that person who's in a protected class. Is there some inconsistency there?
Well, maybe not. LGBTQ is not a protected class, believe it or not. They are treated just like everybody else. They can claim they're being discriminated against, but a private person, an artist, a creator, someone who's making cakes, can refuse service. And that is different from public schools, who are state actors, and they cannot discriminate based on race. And so they cannot admit people who would not otherwise get in, save for their race. So I think they're two slightly different scenarios. It's
apples and oranges. If we were to invert it, it would be if the public university was denying people because of their race, that would be an overt act of discrimination. That wasn't the case here.
Right. It is worth noting private schools could admit students based on race if they wanted. However, they are beholden to federal law if they accept federal money. So Harvard could do whatever it wanted if it did not accept federal funds. It's got plenty of money. It's got a huge endowment. It is accepting that money, however, probably because it's free. And so they do have to abide by the law, just like the University of North Carolina.
You teach at a university. In the political world, Senator Tim Scott, who's running for president right now, says he has this tagline he likes to use on the campaign trail, that education is the closest thing to magic in America. It accelerates you on your ladder of ambition or your pathway to wherever you're going in your career. That brings us to our next Supreme Court case, which was about President Biden for trying to forgive $300 billion in student loan debt. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. You got to go to Congress. There are some people still saying, well, he could use other executive power to do that in using the Department of Education, in just just refusing or declining to collect the debt, or using other sort of workarounds. How authoritative was this rebuke of executive power in your vantage point?
Well, this was a huge amount of money, and the president doesn't have that money, and even the president knows he's got to go to Congress if he wants something like $300 billion. So I'm not sure this was a big surprise. And of course, if Congress voted for loan forgiveness, it could happen, no problem.
They hold the purse strings. That's just the way the Constitution lays out the powers.
Exactly.
Give us a peek behind the curtain. You talked about shredding your notes and starting over. Where could this court be going? If you were to look at reading the direction, taking into account the abortion decision, now these three in succession, is this the end of the line? Are there other cases that you see or other directions the court could go next? How do you look at that?
So this court is really opening up a new chapter. Not just abortion, not just gay rights, not just affirmative action, also guns. The court is really going back to what they call the original vision of the Constitution, our history and tradition. And this is new for those of us who teach. We're going to have to write up some new standards, some new tests, and we'll see. I don't think they're done yet. I think they're just getting started.
And do you think that that's a fair read of how, President Teddy Roosevelt said that the Constitution is supposed to be something, and laws are supposed to be something that evolve and grow with society to adapt to the changes and the changing times. He was a progressive Republican, but do you think that this, I guess you just said that, it's a whole new chapter at the Supreme Court. They're taking things in a different direction. Precedent doesn't seem to hold as much weight as it used to.
That's right. That's right. They are throwing some big precedents out the window. And they're not on the cutting edge of what we would call progressive reform, to mention Teddy Roosevelt. I think what they're doing is they're kind of reminding us that there is a older, more conservative tradition out there, and we can't just ignore it.
Very interesting. Any other takeaways or big notes that you had just watching as an observer or someone who teaches constitutional law, things that stood out to you in this last few weeks?
Well, I think this is a court that is settling scores and not really too concerned about popular opinion. So we'll see what happens. A lot of people are probably getting upset.
And that feeds right into the campaign season. Andrews Walker, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Get the content that matters to you on your time. Breaking news as it happens. Weather alerts when you need them. On air, online, on our app, and on 5+. No matter how you watch, 5 on your side, focused on you. Most people think this is St. Louis, but we know better. The real St. Louis isn't a postcard. It's our neighborhoods, our communities, our people, and that's our focus. 5 on your side is here to tell the stories that affect your neighborhood, that impact your family, that matter to you. Because no story is bigger than the one that affects you. 5 on your side, focused on you.
The fight for Southern Illinois is a slugfest, and it started off that way right out of the starting block earlier this week on July 4th when former state senator and candidate for governor in 2022 Darren Bailey launched his campaign against Congressman Mike Bost. We were there at his family farm in Xenia in Clay County.
My fellow patriots.
Roughly 300 supporters showed up on Independence Day to hear Darren Bailey announce his political ambitions
For United States Congress.
Bailey framed himself as an outsider, challenging D.C. insiders who cozy up to lobbyists in the swamp.
We must fight back and reject the weak-kneed politicians who refuse to stand up and fight.
Mike Bost is a Marine veteran. Do you really think he has weak knees?
I commend Mr. Bost for his service, and I thank anyone who serves in our military. But sometimes then coming in and filling a role in government as a representative, I think is two completely different things.
The Bost campaign called it a shame that Darren Bailey is willing to divide conservatives. But that wasn't selling on the farm.
Well, Darren is the conservative. He's proven that time and time again. Mike Bost, from what I've seen, votes with the Democrats about half the time, and we don't like that.
Team Bost said Bailey is putting selfish opportunism and personal ambition ahead of the interest of Southern Illinois conservatives.
I guess I'm sorry that he chose to start this kind of rhetoric this early. We're going to find out if Southern Illinois thinks Mike Bost has been fighting for them hard enough.
How do you like your congressman?
Bost? I have known the man for years. I've lived in Southern Illinois my whole life. He's a good man. He's a good man. He's not a bad man. I believe in Darren Bailey, and I will be voting for Darren Bailey.
I'm Weather First meteorologist Tracy Hinson, and you're probably used to seeing me here every weekend with your latest forecast. But ever wonder what I do when the cameras are off? I might just be headed to a school or youth group in your area. I show kids at all grade levels the power of science. Look, we made a cloud. We talk safety and demystify the most terrifying of weather phenomena. Getting students excited about science, technology, engineering, and math is incredibly rewarding. But the best part of all is knowing that the next 5 on your side meteorologists might just be in one of our classrooms, and I can't wait to meet them.
Welcome back. The resignation of St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kim Gardner created a massive power vacuum in the city of St. Louis. At the time, Governor Mike Parson, an outstate Republican, promised that he'd seek the counsel of city Democrats, leaders, to help him make that appointment. Not long after he said that, back on May 10th, Mayor Tishaura Jones appeared on KMOX, a local radio station, and said her phone was blowing up from people who were courting her favor as the governor was about to make his pick. They wanted her to throw her hat in the ring for each of them. She joked on that radio interview, "Please don't sunshine my phone," which is the open records law in the state of Missouri. Well, That got us a little curious, wondering what was behind those text messages. So we filed a sunshine request, and we got several of them. At one point, Jones texted a group chat her chief of staff, Jared Boyd, and campaign manager, Rosetta Okasan-Reb. She said, "Why are people blowing me up with replacement suggestions? The ink is barely dry on Kim Gardner's letter. The worst part is this rumor that SR, or Steve Roberts, is going to be appointed as replacement." Mayor Jones then says the Missouri Legislative Black Caucus is about to send a letter to the governor asking him to appoint F. Boyd as circuit attorney. Later, she asks, her campaign manager asks if the mayor might talk to Senator Carla May to squash this. A brief pause here. Senator Carla May is an influential state senator alongside Steve Roberts in that chamber. Roberts, one of Mayor Jones's political foes for a number of reasons. Yes, he ran against Cori Bush for Congress in the last cycle, but he also paid a confidential settlement to one of Jones's close friends, Cora Faith Walker, to try and conceal sexual assault or rape allegations against him before her untimely death in March of last year. Jones has made no qualms or kept any secret about her disdain for Steve Roberts, and that comes through in these texts. Roberts claims the mayor's beef with him actually predates all of this, back to 15 years ago. Roberts sent us this statement, quote, "After the mayor's father got out of federal prison, my family gave him a second chance when no one would hire him. He was fired in 2008. They've had a vendetta against us ever since." Let's go back to the mayor's text where she asks, there's this conversation about trying to squash support from the Black Caucus. That letter was still sent to the governor, so that effort failed if they ever undertook it. Later that same day, the mayor's advisor, Richard Callow, says the former circuit attorney, Jennifer Joyce, called him. Quote, "She will do anything necessary to stop Steve Roberts. There's a personnel file." Callow says she's calling through her Rolodex of Republican prosecutors right now and is having them ask the governor to take her call. She has one message: no Steve. The mayor seems convinced it might work and says, "Bet." Then the mayor says the governor ain't picking him, and we mobilize to make sure he gets dragged. Later on, we see the rest of the story come into clearer focus. Billionaire David Stewart, founder of Worldwide Technologies, texts the profile page of Gabe Gore, a high-powered attorney for corporate interest at Dowd Bennett, to feel the mayor out for her interest in him. She calls Gore a great guy who'd bring a level of professionalism to the office. He says thanks and promises to recommend Gore to the governor. Gore would get the job 10 days later. Now, why bring all this up? Why look at these text messages? The mayor now says we combed through her text to, quote, "make this story up." We should correct the record there. Of course, nothing here is fabricated or invented or made up. It's all right there in the plain text. She also found the story invasive and unnecessary. We'll grant her that. It may be a bit invasive. That's the price of admission, after all, for public life. When you sign up to serve, you do sacrifice a bit of the comforts of privacy for the benefit of the public transparency. But unnecessary, that's where we'll correct the record once more. The voting public does deserve to know how their elected officials act to peddle influence, how much time they might spend working to carry out personal vendettas, and to learn more about their real motivations. That does it for us this week. We'll see you right back here at the same time next week. Until then, we're off the record.